Calamari, salutations everyone! Squid here, bringing you the second episode of the Clean Sweep. And Clean Sweep is the show about the YCL where the analyst fails almost all he speaks in the week, proving he's the best analyst ever, right? Right, so we'll see the pick'ems when they come in the middle of the show, but in case you forgot, this show has essentially two parts. One is the review of last week's matches and basically the standings, how they stand at the end of that week. And the second part of the show is the pick'ems. So it's the third week, so you're still on time to participate on the pick'ems. The more people that participate in them, the better. It's more fun to compete against more people. And I don't know, maybe you're a better analyst than I am and you don't know that. So feel free to join. It's fun. And we'll start first things first with the review from last week's matches. So in the first match that we're gonna review, the three Electrons beat the Miami Heatmore 2-0. Really cool set in the beginning of the match was the lead Relicant. I liked it very much. And Aldra just led the Relicant with the Sturdy because it knew it would leave any hit from anything. It ended up just with a tiny smidge of HP, but then Aldra had a decision to make, which was whether to save the Relicant for later or just proc the cast up in that turn. Unfortunately for him, he ended up proccing the cast up that turn, which I find was the poorer of the two decisions, because he only used it to toxic the Como, and at that point the Como was proven to be offensive, so it would get a lot of work done with the Primarina, and the Primarina, I think, in my opinion, was a really good switch because it resisted the fighting type move, and second because since it had the Kazib Berry, I think that's what it's called, it would always survive the hit from the Como, so it could KO it back with the Moonblast, which ended up happening the next turn. So I think Mr. Alder there was trying a little bit too much to get his tech to work and ended up paying a little bit for it, and the way he paid for it was just brutal. So when the Primarinas sat on the field, Aldra did gain some momentum, but the Primarina was then KO'd by the Landorus Incarnate with the Sludge Wave, and then Garchomp entered the field. And Garchomp enters the field SDs once, Swords Dance once, as the Dhelmise switches in, and Swords Dances twice as the Dhelmise clicks Poltergeist. And then that crucial turn happened where the Garchomp went for the Dragon Scale, the Scale Shot I mean, and it only hit twice. And by hitting only twice, the Dhelmise survived, and it was KO'd in return by the Poltergeist. So lessons to be learned here. Scale Shot really a gamble sometimes, because you might get that 12.5% chance of only getting 2 hits and then your sweep is a history. Garchomp would have swept it if it had hit 3 times. But the thing is, the way Aldra played in the early game, he positioned himself in a way that he had to basically sweep at that time. Otherwise he wouldn't win. And my piece of advice is maybe that was a little bit too early in the match to begin a sweep, in my opinion. Yes, so Aldra's main plan for the battle didn't work, and since he didn't have a plan B, he basically just rolled over and waited for the 3 Electrons to win. So the rest of the match was a trade by trade, a trade of Pokemon by Pokemon, and it just ended up with the 3 Electrons winning because they had more Pokemons left. That's just it. So we're moving on to the Austin Taurus versus the Philadelphia Melmetals, and I said this was the match of the week. It wasn't quite as hype as last week's match of the week, but it was a really interesting match nonetheless. So the Austin Taurus won a 4-0 victory quite convincingly, and I think the main reason for that is actually some decisions that were made before the battle. So I think the Philadelphia Melmetals really made a mistake of not bringing Frostlass into the match, because offensive Frostlass, since the Austin Taurus don't have a dark type and their normal type is Leaky Tongue, they didn't really have a ghost resist, and that could be taken advantage of with the choice band set from Frostlass. I think it could have worked really nicely, and both me and the champ, Sally Mumble, were really surprised to not see the Frostlass in the match. So the match really did begin with the Bronzong from the Austin Taurus applying some early pressure with no item, which ended up working versus the Ferrothorn, and they set up a body press, an Iron defense and then just starting body pressing, and some back and forth positioning trade was made after that, and the Archeops stood in front of the Tentacruel. And at that point, my mind was like, he's going to Earthquake now, right? And I get that you didn't Earthquake because the Earthquake wouldn't kill if the Tentacruel had some defense investment. But I mean, you only had two offensive mons on your party, the Blaziken and the Archeops, and if you're not attacking with none of those, you're really not gonna win, I think, because you have to win slow grinding matches, and the champ was well prepared for that, and I think not clicking Earthquake at that point was a mistake. I think that's also where the coin flippy nature of Archeops came to light, because I get that you didn't want to take damage with the Scald or something like that, but the thing is, if you don't attack, if you don't damage your opponent, ultimately you won't win. So with an offensive Pokemon on the field, I'd say quite well positioned to make an attacking move, you have to go for it. You have to press the switch and you don't have to be afraid. Sometimes it will backfire, but sometimes, like this turn, it would pay off because Sally Mumble ended up switching to something else and it was just free damage on whatever came in. Little more forward in the match, Dragonite sat in front of the Ferrothorn, and I think the fire move should have been expected because Dragonite has an insane coverage, it's a fantastic mon, and I love it very much, and I'm hoping I get to use it one day, and you just had to expect the fire move at that point because I think well, for the reasons I already mentioned, not much to say at that point. So the thing is, Ferrothorn went down. That meant that Sceptile just was free to sweep the enemy team. So Sceptile came in after an Electric Seed proc for the Unburden, and the Nasty was enough to just clean house, and there was nothing the Philadelphia Melmetals could do at that point. So besides bringing Frostlass, I think the other thing the Philadelphia Melmetals could have done differently is eventually try to make use of the terrain yourself. So the electric terrain was kind of expected from the Taurus side, so maybe bringing an electric seed on something to try and capitalize on the electric terrain. Maybe bringing, I think it was the Jolteon that was on your team to just hit things hard with the terrain also. Something like that. I think more than the bad decisions you made in-game, those decisions were basically made because of some decisions you made before the game, and that is ultimately what I think ended up costing the win to the Melmetals. Next, we'll go into a very interesting match where I could basically talk about it just in a single video, but that will take way too long, so we'll try to resume whatever happened there, because it was really wild. So the key member to this match for both the 6th Street Viper and the Trashtown Thieves was the Zapdos. So 6th Street Viper basically want to enable the Zapdos, and the Trashtown Thieves want to block it. And the way they came up with blocking the Zapdos was bringing Assault Vest Lantern. So keep that in mind, it's Assault Vest. Rain Lead from the 6th Street Viper was to be expected, so Bishmi countered it with the Executor really well, and just began the match full throttle, just clicking Giga Drain on whatever came in. Later on in the match, the Zapdos is on the field, and the most obvious switch in is the Lantern, so the Lantern switches in, and then Empire Sharky decided to make a questionable play, which was to check if the Lantern was Volt Absorb. And I mean, since you already have the Mantine on your team as a water absorber, there was just not an explanation for the Lantern to not be Volt Absorb, because otherwise it would just run wild on the enemy team. Bishmi would have no counter for it, so it's obvious that Lantern is Volt Absorb. And Lantern is capable of tanking the Zapdos quite well, so the previous chip on Lantern, which will matter later down the line, ended up being healed back by Sharky after dealing it, so it was really questionable, and you don't have to be sure that the Lantern is Volt Absorb. You just assume worst case scenarios. Okay, so this guy is Volt Absorb, I want to chip it down as much as possible because it's basically walling my Zapdos and it's walling my win condition. Next, Bishmi, there was a lot of pivoting back and forth, and Bishmi just enabled his Volt Turn core to the fullest, and this part of the match is basically a prime example of why momentum is so important on the match, because Bishmi just kept momentum up on his side of the field, and it just enabled him to make the plays he wanted to make. And basically Empire Sharky at that point was just reacting to whatever Bishmi was doing, and that ultimately got him the upper hand, and that's why Bishmi managed to KO so many mons on the first part of the match. And then the first major mistake from Sharky comes, where he is with the Politoed in front of the Darmanitan, and Darmanitan hits like a truck, and it had the choice band for this match, and it just sat there and took an earthquake to the face and it died. And that meant that for the rest of the battle, Sharky didn't have his rain to help me. So Bishmi just had to deal with the rain team without the rain, and that obviously puts him in a really good position. In the middle of the match, some hacks starts to roll both ways, a freeze on a Mantine, a really low roll to not KO the Alolan Executor, into an also quite low roll, but I think the roll was in Sharky's favor to not be KO'd by the Executor. And then Barraskewda comes in and doesn't attack, and is sacked 2 turns later, and that was honestly Sharky's second mistake, because Bishmi was telling how scared he was of that Barraskewda, and you drafted Barraskewda as a first pick, and then you just sack your first pick to enable, of all things, a special Talonflame that was obviously tanked by the Assault Vest Lantern that you already knew existed. I don't know. That was just confusing to me. So You basically preserve the Talon Flame, and to preserve the Talon Flame you sack the Barraskewda that was hitting the Lantern, which was stopping the Zapdos from winning you the game. Quite questionable decision, gotta say. Then Bishmi also made his part of the mistakes, so he set Frozen with the Mantine in front of something that I don't remember quite what was, but you guys are seeing on the screen. And then he doesn't Scald to thaw the ice. Come on, Bishmi, come on. Why Roost there? Yeah, so a little bit more pivoting, and Zapdos ends up in front of the Lantern. And now we see why T-bolting earlier in the match was such a horrible idea, because that difference in HP basically made the Lantern sit 2 more turns in front of the Zapdos. So that was 2 more turns where Empire Sharky didn't have advantage to start sweeping the enemy team. And then that fateful turn at the end of the match, boy was it messy. So Boltund is in front of the Zapdos, he clicks Thunderfang, which is a 95% accurate move, and it misses. And not only that, but the Zapdos hits a 70% chance Hurricane and then crits the Boltund. And the only way the Zapdos KOs the Boltund at that turn was the crit, because without the crit it wouldn't have happened. So that crit definitely mattered, but then just some justice was done when the Darm comes in the next turn and just clicks Icicle Crash, and the Hurricane from the Zapdos gladly misses. And yes, so messy game, lots of hacks, lots of errors, mostly on Sharky's side. But at the end of the day, I think justice was done. Bishmi played better, and he deserved to win this match. And the only way it would have been stalled was if the Hurricane missed. If the Hurricane missed, Bishmi couldn't recover from that, basically. So I'm glad to see that the hacks interfered in the match, but didn't interfere on who was the victor. Next we have the Hustle Gods, who lost 0-4 to the new kid on the block, Arts, and his Rustboro City Rejects. So the Rejects have a great lead, which netted them much momentum in early game. I loved seeing the substitute Urshifu. It was played beautifully, and it displayed some masterful skills when the Nidoking was faster, so it would break his sub. So he subbed again to take the future sight hit, and then knowing just the Colk from Drain Punch, just enough to know how it would kill the Nidoking at that point. So I loved seeing the Urshifu utilized really well. But then after the break from Urshifu, Nasty Plot Crobat just entered the field and started sweeping left and right. Even the clear Smog wasn't enough to stop it, the Crobat at that point. So Arts grabbed a really nice victory there, a 4-0 victory against the Hustle Gods. And unfortunately the Hustle Gods had to drop out from the league due to personal reasons, and we wish him all the best to the coach Kings Rock. But we already have found a substitute coach, which is King Souza. He played in the last season, and we're really excited to see how Souza does from this point onwards. Next we had the Immunity Idols returning to form with their 3-0 victory versus the Sydney Six. And this was probably the upset of the week if power rankings are to be recalled. But if coach skill is taken into consideration, this was basically not a surprise, because we know the runner-up from last season is a great battler and prepper. So the match just started out slow, Ferroseed getting chipped, and Heatran basically sitting lots of turns in front of the Immunity Idols. The Thunder Wave on the first turn was crucial because it ended up netting Monte 3 or 4 free turns during the match. And the reason the match was so slow in the early game was because Monte wasn't chipping the hit run. Because once the hit run got chipped from the middle of the match onwards by the Mandibus, he started to be able to put his offensive threats on the field, mainly the Heracross, who could now threaten the hit run with Mega Horns and close combats for the KO. From the latter end of the match, there were two glaring mistakes from the Sydney 6 side. The first was not clicking Dazzling Gleam with the Celebi first on the field. Dazzling Gleam was always the play because it would hit both the threat that was on the field. I think it was the Heracross, and the expected switching to the Celebi, which would be the Mandibus. So it was super effective on both of those mons, so it basically had no reason to not click Dazzling Gleam at that point. And then the second one was I think it was a less obvious mistake, but it can be counted as one, because you basically had to make a choice where you go for the Psychic and just claim the KO for sure, and maybe risk a switch into the Mandibus, or just click Moonblast, which would be the safer play. It would chip the Cell Valley down, but unfortunately it wasn't enough to net him the win, the KO. So not getting the KO on the Cell Valley meant that you had to risk a speed tie, and you didn't risk the speed tie and ended up sacking Scrafty for it. And when you sacked Scrafty, the game was over, because Spectrier always won from that point. There was no question asked. It was a Assault Vest, so the Celebi even outspeeding wouldn't kill it for sure. Next we have the Sen versus Sen matchup, and Sen unfortunately lost to Luke Harry. 4-0 victory for the Cerulean City Mewtwo. The match started up with a wrong item on the Mew, which ended up being good because it paralyzed the Klefki in return and cured the paralysis from the Mew. And then the Blaziken started going on the offensive. Maybe a little bit too early to try and set up on the match, but it could make sense, because I don't think that Sen was planning to win with the Moltres, just trying to chip down things. So Moltres started setting up first an Agility, then a Nasty Plot, and the T-Wave from the Miltank was really crucial, because not only it stopped setting up turn from the Blazikens, it also made the Moltres slow, so that the Specs Whimsicott could come in, and then it just started killing things left and right. The Klefki was chipped earlier in the match, and it just couldn't take one Thunderbolt to the face. And even if it could have set up a screen, like light screen, it wouldn't be enough, because the Whimsicott had Infiltrators. So really good prep on Luke Harry's part for that reason. And the Whimsicott just claimed 2 fast kills, one of those being in the Latias, so that was really huge. And then basically it chipped down the Palpitoad, and the Palpitoad KO'd it in return with the Sludge Wave. So at that point Mew comes in front of the Palpitoad, and when Mew comes in on you, you always have to assume it has perfect coverage to hit you. And unfortunately for Sen, that's what happened. It clicked Energy Ball. There was no way the Palpitoad would survive at that point. And then the game was really assured when the Zapdos was tricked an Iron Ball from the Sableye before it got taunted. The Ice Punch was a 2-hit KO, which honestly surprised me with the amount of damage it dealt. But nonetheless, gotta say, kind of an easy win for the Cerulean City Mewtwo. They didn't even have to put the Dracovish on the field. so their prep was really on point, and Sen had few answers for what Luke Harry brought to the match. Next we have the Nashville Nido Kings winning a 3-0 victory versus the Brisbane Real Boomers, and the Real Boomers were really plagued by 2 triple axel misses early game. That's always a risk. There's always a risk involved when running inaccurate moves. The Brisbane Real Boomers were really punished for it this match. I don't think it would have influenced the match how it played out in the end, but still it was more than demoralizing for the team that's clicking the moves and not hitting them, and maybe Justin lost a little bit of mental edge on that part, but nonetheless he still stood early game with the Hitmontop on the field, and the Hitmontop was applying a lot of pressure. It always killed the Marowak, and he had a nice prediction with the rapid spin on the Landorus, and because of the rapid spin he was faster than the Landorus, and it threatened him out, and the Arachnid was then positioned to set up the webs on the field. Nashville Nido Kings were on the back foot, so Southside Braves had to make a play to try and get in momentum back, and the play he made was a beautiful double into the Landorus on the field, with it now being faster than the Hitmontop, and then he clicked fly on a Zygarde switching, and honestly I don't think the Zygarde switching was the play at all from that on that turn. You could have sacked something else maybe, that was less important, but nonetheless Zygarde was on the field. It took a fly to the face because it was Power Herb, and then it just put him in range for the outrage from the Landorus to KO the Zygarde, and Zygarde, the only thing it did this match was just clicking 1000 arrows in front of Landorus, which it didn't even KO. So props to Braves for countering the Zygarde so well, even if it was at the brink of a misplay from the opponent. So Landorus is now locked into outrage, and the Araquanid is the initial send out from Justin, but he then switches out into the Rotom. Like I said, Landorus was locked into outrage. There was no way he was clicking the fly or the stone moves, so you pretty much could have stayed in with the Araquanid, or even just stay in with the Rotom the first turn and just click the overheat so you could KO the Landorus. But what happened is the Rotom took 2 outrages to the face, and that was really low, and with the Rotom really low, the Electivire could just come in at that point and start KOing stuff, but that wasn't what happened. The Shelgon came in, so the Shelgon was a really nice bring. It was really cool to see. Wish, Dragon Dance, Outrage, and Stone Edge. So Outrage and Stone Edge were really huge at that point of the battle, because Justin just had sacked the 2 things that resisted the stone moves, which were the Hitmontop and the Zygarde. So he was from that point onwards, Braves was really free to to click rock moves on the opponent. That's what happened at the end of the battle. First we still had a 1v1 with the Shelgon and the Trevenant. I think Will-O-Wisp on the Trevenant would have been a really nice bring. I even talked with the Southside Braves about that, which would deter his team very much. So kinda disappointed by not seeing the Will-O-Wisp. But the Shelgon managed to 1v1 the Trevenants at the end of the day, even if it was KO'd. At that point, AV Corporaja just took everything from the enemy team and won, and it outright won the match from that point. So yeah, nice win for Braves on that one. Justin is left recovering and trying to bounce back next week. And the last match of the week was the Hellblaze Volcaronas versus the Ender Teddiursas, with a 4-0 victory for Lucas. The leads were standard for both players, and there was kind of a little bit of switching at the beginning, and then the match really opened when the Garbodor surprised the Salazzle with the Stomping Tantrum, which is quad effective. It was then revenged by the Latios, and the Latios revenging the Garbodor basically told Lucas that when he switched it out, he definitely was Specs, because otherwise he would have stayed in on the Dragapult. And basically, whenever Dragapult entered the field, it just claimed the kill. Nothing could switch in on it, and unfortunately for the Ender Teddiursas, they tried to switch in the things that could at least survive a hit from the Dragapult. So first time they switched in the Umbreon, and the Umbreon could have worked to KO the Dragapult, because Dragapult couldn't stay in on it if it was at risk of being foul played, because Dragapult always was KO'd by a foul play, no matter what, and it couldn't one-hit KO the Umbreon. So the play, whenever Dragapult hit the field, was just sacking something, bringing Umbreon in, and when the Umbreon was in, the Dragapult had to switch out, basically. Unfortunately for the Ender Teddiursas, Fuego didn't do that. He switched in the Umbreon directly, and the Umbreon was to hit KO'd by the Choice Band Dragapult. So Sucker Punch could have worked if the Dragapult at least had previous chip, but the damage wouldn't never be enough for it to KO. Golurk comes in next and presses Gravity. When the Golurk pressed Gravity, it was the only few turns where the Ender Teddiursas had advantage on the match. They exerted a lot of pressure because the Calamari couldn't stay in on the risk of being earthquaked. And then the Machoke was on the field. It was traded for the Excelgor, but then Dragapult hits the field once again, and when the Ender Teddiursas switched in the Tangrowth directly, it just meant that everything was on Dragon Dart's range, and at that point Dragapult just clean house. There was no way the match would go any other way. So this concludes the review from the matches of last week. Coach of the week, I give it to the Immunity Idols. I knew Malte was really good, but when you consider the power rankings from last week, it was the 14th spot or 13th, something like that, beating up the second place on the power rankings. So that can be called the upset of the week, and that's why I gave it to the Immunity Idols. So these are the roster that he used to win the match. And for MVP of the week, we gotta give it to the Crobat. It basically swept the Hustle Gods, netting 5 kills on his personal account, and is basically one of the kill leaders of the league, joined by that faithful Double. And for the weekly Mug Cargo, I give it to the lead Relicanth. It was really cool, the idea behind it. The spread was an offensive one, as you can see, but it didn't end up working that well because it could have clicked Liquidation or Flail or something like that, but it mostly ended up stealth rocking. But it's cool to see the idea because Sturdy means that the Relicanth would always survive a hit, and with the cast up berry it could get another unexpected hit off, and if that Liquidation was hitting the Landorus, that would have dealt massive damage to the enemy team. So props to the hit. This is what the standings look like. So in the Armored Division, Austin Torres and Trashtown Thieves sit at the top, while the Philadelphia Melmetals and the Cold Summer Assassins, the new team from King Souza, sit at the bottom. Next we have the Crown Division, and in the Crown Division the Hellblaze Volcaronas and the Nashville Nidokings are still undefeated, and on the other side of the spectrum, the Andor Teddy Ursas and the Calexican Blazicans are still trying to find their first win. So, onwards to Pick'ems. This was not a great week for me in terms of Pick'ems. I only got 2 right, and I think that serves me right because I was making fun of Sven, and Sven got 5 scores right this week. I decided to not point the Hustle Gods versus the Rasboro City Rejects because the change was made midweek, so people could not have known the ability of Art to net the win or not. So I decided to not score that match at all. Most people would have got it right. I personally wouldn't, but that was not the reason I decided to not score that match. So as you can see on total win rate, Southside Braves is actually in front of the league right now. So with 76%, almost 77% right pick, he's basically the better analyst at the moment. So gotta pull my sleeves up and get to work, and we're going to get to work now with the pick'ems for week 3. So first match is the Philadelphia Melmetals versus the Trashtown Thieves. This match has already occurred. I'll put the card on the top right of your screen, so go check out that battle. But what I've got to say about this match still is the Melmetals made some changes to their roster, and the Victini does look good offensively this match. I think Clefable will have a hard time being a defensive wall for the Thieves because they have many good physical threats, but an offensive set of Clefable Life Orb could work with the fire move against the Thieves. Jellicent checks the Darmanitan with relative ease. The Thieves did pick up Sableye this week, and it might do wonders this match, taunting things left and right that might otherwise be a nuisance to deal with. Roster for roster, in other situations I would have picked the Melmetals, but I think Bishmi can really net the win to this battle. Did he win? I don't know, guys, go find out. So, first match for the Pick'ems in themselves, it's a 6th Street Survivor versus the Cold Summer Assassins. So it will be the debut of Souza in the YCL. He revamped the roster from the Hansel Gods. And unfortunately for Souza, his team doesn't take water moves that well, but he does have an offensive card up his sleeve. The Morgram is the only resist to the Urshifu's Wicked Blow, so he can try to exploit that in some way. Speed tiers aren't that great for the Cold Summer Assassins also, but they do have a lot of Wish Passers and a lot of priority users, so they can try and utilize that instead of pure speed. But because the Survivor generally has the speed advantage and the speed control with the rain, I'll go with them because they still had a close match, even from deterring from the fact that they had a really bad matchup last week. So with the good matchup this week, I think in theory they can grab the win for themselves. Next we have the match of the week, and it's the Miami Heatmore against the Austin Torres. There was also another match that I could have called match of the week, but from the levels I've seen from all 4 coaches, I think this one has more potential to it. Miami Heatmar have Chandelure, and Chandelure basically is unresisted on the side of the Austin Taurus, so they can freely spam Shadow Ball if the Lickitung doesn't come to the match. Unfortunately for the Hitmar, because of the speed tiers on the enemy team, he will probably have to run it Scarfed, so he can't hit as hard with it, but there's still some good things. I mean, it's still Chandelure, it's still hitting hard, so yeah, that 145 special attack is no joke. On the other hand, they do have the Alolan Raichu, and with the Taurus having the electric terrain on their side, the Alolan Raichu will be a really good bring to take advantage of said terrain. On the side of the Taurus, there are two good ways to revenge kill the Garchomp, being Dragonite and Tapu Koko. So Dragonite with the heavy duty boots basically has the multiscale, which can make him survive any hit from the Garchomp. It's also faster, so it's always a free switch in on a non-scarfed or a +1 speed Garchomp. And the Tapu Koko is always a phenomenal bring on the Garchomp. That fairy move will always hit the Garchomp hard, and it's way faster than it, so with some sets it can also outspeed a +2 Garchomp with the Choice Scarf. So yeah, that's basically it. Nothing. So the Garchomp will really have a hard time. That would rather it was used as a wall breaker of some sorts, especially with the Choice Band set, instead of trying to sweep with the Garchomp as we've seen in previous weeks. So the Tentacruel also checks the Primarina brilliantly, and the Primarina could be a card up Ultra sleeve. So nothing also takes the combination of stabs from Mamoswine, so Mamoswine will run free on this match, and that's why I decided to go with the champ. That, and combined with the performance he's had so far, because the 2 matches he's played beautifully. One of those wasn't even close at any point, so yeah, I'm going with Sally for this one. Next we have what is probably a very interesting match also, the Rustboro City Rejects versus the 3 Electrons, and I think these two coaches have a similar level of performance to them. The main reason I chose the 3 Electrons was because Landorus Incarnate, there's basically no resist for it. Maybe a Sand on the Gigalith to raise his special defense with an Assault Vest on top. Maybe that can resist some hits, but I'm struggling to see something that resists the Landorus, honestly. Speed tiers allow the Landorus also on the enemy side, also allow the Landorus to run a Life Orb, and there's not basically much that can come in on it and revenge it, because basically nothing on the enemy team outspeeds it, and the ones who do don't really hit the Landorus that hard. Lycanroc in Sand gets walled by the Seismitoad, but if the Seismitoad is out of the way, that can potentially lead to the Lycanroc doing work this match also. But the Urshifu, boy, if I was Arts on this week, I wouldn't bring the Urshifu because it just has a horrid matchup. So Delmise on the enemy team, Rocky Helmet Slowbro to try and take the hits from the Surging Strikes. I wouldn't, if I were Arts, I wouldn't bring the Urshifu this week. That's the type of week Urshifu has. That's why I decided to go with the 3 Electrons. They basically have the matchup advantage on this one, and because the coaches are from a similar level of performance in my point of view, I decided to go with them. Next we have the other match that could potentially be a match of the week, we have the Cerulean City Mewtwo against the Nashville Nidokings. And these two coaches have impressed me this season so far by their performance levels. I knew Southside Braves from other leagues, and I honestly didn't expect this good of a performance from him. He really caught up with the top of the coaches league, the league's top coaches. The reason I decided to go with the Cerulean City Mewtwo is basically look at Southside Braves team and check for Dracovish resist. I will tell you, there's none. There's absolutely no way the Dracovish doesn't clean house this game. But I mean, Braves has surprised me before, so I'm looking forward to see what he cooks up. But I honestly don't see a way of him stopping the Dracovish this match. He's sure going to have to pull a miracle on this one. Next we have the Brisbane Rillaboomers versus the Hellblaze Volcaronas. This match has also occurred, so it won't count for the pick'ems. But what I'd like to say was Lucas. I feel like this is the first match where Lucas will be put to the test, because Justin can perform at a really high level from what I've seen, and the Quagsire is a really good check to Zygarde, so I honestly don't expect the Zygarde to put much work this match. Licky Licky is almost forced to come, because otherwise the Dragapult will just run wild, and since the Zygarde is so well checked by the Volcaronas, and the check to the Dragapult isn't that a phenomenal of a mon, I decided to go with Lucas, that and the monstrous performance he put up on the first 2 weeks of the league. So I decided to give it to Lucas. Did he win, guys? I don't know. Go check it out. The Sydney 6 then will face the Calexico Blazicans, and Sen has restructured the rest of his team, bringing in Hydreigon and Charizard. Hydreigon can do some stuff this match. Charizard, I don't see it putting much work this match specifically, but eventually it will get his time on the sun. Pun intended. So I'll look at the Calexico Blazicans team, and I see Special Defense Klefki really putting in work against the Tapu Lele, because it resists both of its stats, and it's capable of crippling it with a Thunder Wave or just setting up a screen. And besides that, very few things on the Sydney 6 side appreciate taking a close combat or a Thunderous Kick from the Zapdos. And also the Volturn core from Sen really wants to put in work. So Zapdos and Zeraora really put in work against the Sydney 6 team, and because it fits the Calexico Blazicans and Sen style so much, I decided to go with Sen this match. One reason being the Sydney 6 not really impressing me at all on week 2, and the other reason being that Volturn core, which is such a characteristic part of Sen's play. He loves using momentum, and I think using momentum this match is the way to go for him, because it would position two really threatening mons on the enemy side of the field. But that doesn't mean that the Sydney 6 don't have their aces up the sleeves. So I mentioned the Klefki before, and Klefki is basically checking a lot of mons on the enemy team, and because it's performing that role, it may get really chipped down, and once the Klefki is chipped down enough, the Noivern just basically runs wild on Sen's team. So if Sen is capable of preserving his Klefki somewhat, while using him to check some threats on the enemy team. I think Sen will have this match, but if he lets the Klefki go down really soon on the match, I think he will struggle a little bit to net him the win. But like I said before, Volt turning is the way to go on this match, and I think he can do what it takes to get him the first win of the season. And now the last match of the week, we have the Endor Teddy Ursus versus the Immunity Idols, and Mounted really did pump up his performance last week. He finally performed at the level that I know he can do that. So when I look at Mounte's team, Heracross puts in an insane amount of work versus the Endor Teddy Ursus, with nothing really want to take a combination from the two stabs. Maybe Salazzle, but Salazzle is not really a resist though. And on the other hand, Cloyster can also function quite well against the enemy team, so I really struggle to see the Endor Teddy Ursus coming out on top of this one. That and when you take into consideration the performance they had last week, it didn't look that great. So I'm expecting something out of the Endor Teddy Ursus that can make me say that this is a team I can bet on. So until that happens, I will refrain from picking them. This concludes our pick'ems for this week. This also concludes our show for this week. If you made it until this point of the video, you're awesome, and thank you very much for it. Don't forget to leave your pick'ems down below. It's week 3, you're still on time to participate on them. Even if you aren't a coach of the league, you can still participate on pick'ems. And yeah, this is basically it. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you haven't already, go and see the matches that have already occurred, go subscribe to all the coaches on the YCL, and we'll see you for the power rankings from this week. Yeah. Squid, jetting out.